Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to another episode of People on the Move, a Cargomatic podcast. I'm Weston, LaBar. With me today, Josh Lowenthal, State Assembly member for the state of California, representing Long Beach and most of the major goods movement corridors of Southern California near the port. Josh, this is obviously not a new subject matter for you. You kind of grew up in politics, but at the same time, I think I want to start with what your background is, because most people don't know you have a fascinating background. You're a businessman, you're very accomplished, and we're happy to have you in Sacramento because you actually understand our issues.
Thank you, Wes. And first of all, thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for having this podcast. Goods movement is a community. It needs to be something where we're, interfacing with each other, learning from each other. And I think you do a wonderful job at really getting out there and talking about the issues. And, this role as the state assembly member representing Long Beach, Carson, Signal Hill, and Avalon is a gift. And I really do feel like I identify with the stakeholders that are involved in the goods movement sector. To answer your question, I actually, did not grow up around politics. My parents, who both, had long careers in public life, didn't begin serving until I was an adult, actually. And I grew up when they were activists in the community, trying to do things as community members. And my dad was a professor of psychology at Long Beach State. My mom taught at Long Beach City College. And I learned from them just being involved is an obligation that we all have. And, improving your neighbor's quality of life and not just your own is something that we all, should share and we all should do. I grew up in Long Beach, went to Long Beach Public Schools, graduated from Long Beach Poly in 1988, and went off to college in New York. Came back and was a teacher at Long Beach Unified School District. I taught high school history and government. And then got a graduate degree in international affairs and international management and began my own career in international business. I gravitated towards telecommunications, which isn't goods movement. It's, a different sector, but a lot of the same areas. I ultimately found myself owning and operating a phone carrier business in West Africa and had a network in 10 countries in West Africa. That graduated into a teleconferencing company, which ultimately became swallowed and part of freeconferencecall.com, was the president of that company. That's a Long Beach-based company, and became involved in local businesses here in our community too, which I still do today. And this sort of commitment to public life and being involved always stayed with me. I always stayed involved in Long Beach as a major volunteer, did a lot in the way of homeless services and specifically affecting children in an organization called Children Today that provides no-cost childcare for families experiencing homelessness in our community. And ultimately was able to run for office when my good friend Patrick O'Donnell decided not to run for re-election after 8 years in the legislature. And so here I am today, and taking the lessons I learned from my parents and growing up in our community, and the lessons I learned from the business community, and lessons in international business in particular, and hope to apply those to the world of goods movement.
Yeah, and I think for us, from an industry perspective, having you there right now is such an interesting time, because goods movement has gotten more focus, not just in the industry, but on a national and international level because of COVID and the delays we saw in the supply chain, and just how essential the supply chain is to every other business and the quality of life of the humans that depend on not just the next day Amazon package, but healthcare, right? Food, anything that you need to sustain your life. Medicine, everything you need to sustain your life. Our supply chain has become such a crucial element of getting things to people and people to things, right?
And I'm glad you brought up COVID, Weston, because we had to look within ourselves and re-examine how we view people who are involved in the supply chain, people who worked at supermarkets. And we didn't understand that these were frontline workers and to some degree heroes. And people who worked in goods movement sector, got COVID during that period of time, and some of them brought it home, and some of them live in multi-generational households, and elders in their household may have died from the disease. And they did that to be able to provide goods and services that we all rely upon heavily, and so they were heroes. And it really has changed the way that I look at the people that are involved in goods movement, whether those are the longshore workers, the truckers, people in management, everyone involved in the cog. And I will, for the rest of my life, have tremendous amount of gratitude and respect for the men and women that, put themselves out there on behalf of all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the understanding of the people and the understanding of the process that the people are involved in, right? In the beginning, I'll never forget, some workers were asked to come back to work. Think about those longshore workers, right? That are out on the docks, loading ships, loading trucks. But then some of the municipal governments shut down warehouses. Where do you take the product once that freight is unloaded at the port? Where do you take it if you're not allowed to have a warehouse open? And so I think, to your point, we started to understand that almost every person in their profession is in some way related to the supply chain, and in some way what they do is affected by that supply chain, whether you're a local retailer, whether you're a local restaurant, or to your point again, whether you're a nurse saving somebody's life on the front line in the emergency room. You become a supply chain worker. I think everything is supply chain, but if I didn't, I probably wouldn't be here, because I'm such a passionate advocate. And I know it's something that you have as a top priority at the state of California, is how the ports and the supply chain can not just make California easier for California businesses, but also you look at it holistically, right? The business has to do well to do good. And at the same time, I know your background, I know your parents, I would say the Lowenthal family philosophy is we can all do better, right? And everything needs to work in harmony. And a big part of that is the balance between the business, the environment, doing right by the workers. So talk a little bit about your experience in Sacramento thus far, being a relatively new first-term assembly member, and then the priorities that you want to work on as it relates to the supply chain, because really, as you know, there's so many different off-ramps, if you will, that you can start to go down when the supply chain's involved, and they're all related, right? When you don't have happy workers, we just saw this. When you have workers on a labor dispute, it impacts the folks that utilize those facilities, whether that's UPS or the LW. When you have environmental imbalances, you have businesses that need to figure out how to work effectively, but then you have communities that want to figure out how to have better community partners. And there's an ongoing debate that happens since I've moved here and well before then in California. And then there's just a lot as it relates to trying to invest in infrastructure and invest in our labor force and get the right training for workers. So I've just thrown a couple of them out there. None of them are small issues, but all of them are ones that you're facing.
Yeah, boy, you don't like the short and simple yes or no questions. Okay, so let's touch on some things that you said. First of all, this sort of notion of we can all do better. I think, we can all do better, but I think my philosophy in problem solving as it relates to goods movement or any issue facing the state of California, the people of the state of California, is how do we find a win-win? There's not a zero-sum situation between business and residents. How can we make, our communities safer and more livable? How can we improve in people's quality of life while we drive the economy forward, while we increase trade, not decrease trade? And I believe in that. I truly and totally, completely believe in that. And it's not going to be a quick and easy path to that, but I do believe in that. So we have to examine, honestly, the situation and start with the end goal and kind of work backwards. Well, in goods movement, the things that we're looking at and addressing quite simply are, and I'll tie in COVID to this as well. If you look at the heat maps of people who passed away in COVID in our communities. They lived along the goods movement corridors. Now, some may say, well, these are people who may not have had healthy lifestyles, that there is a bit of self-selection that live in those areas. There may be an ounce of truth to that, but the reality is there's much higher levels of lung disease of people who live in those areas. And that can be directly attributed to the air quality in that area, and we have to change it. The number one job of government is to protect its citizens. Can we change that and be mindful of ways that can increase actual traffic, that can actually increase economic activity in our goods movement corridor? I believe that it can. And those are the things that we're examining in Sacramento as we speak. And we also have to look at the dynamic changes that are happening in our workforce as a whole. I asked the speaker for a select committee on automation, as a matter of fact, because of the changes that are taking place in our workforce right now. In automation, that has a lot to do with goods movement. It has to do with everything. I have 3 daughters. Their favorite store to go shopping in is Urban Outfitters. You now can go into Urban Outfitters, get your clothes, check out on your own, and walk out, not work with anyone. It's happening in our agriculture sector. It's happening, obviously there's a lot of discussion around autonomous vehicles and how that will affect truckers and so forth. And we don't have clear answers as to, we don't have a plan on automation at all. Should we be afraid of technology? Absolutely not. We should embrace it, but we need a plan, or else local businesses are really going to suffer. If we end up with a situation of total and complete wealth consolidation, that's bad for our economy. The best economy that we can have is when we have the most amount of people with the most disposable income in our community. So we have to be mindful of the changes that are happening in workforce. And I think it's no more obvious than in the goods movement sector, whether it is the truckers, the longshoremen, and so forth. Even trains. Trains now drive themselves. They didn't used to. Airplanes, for the most part, are driving themselves. Air traffic control is all software driven these days. We still have people involved, of course, but we've moved over to a service sector as it relates to that software. Our local economy doesn't have a software component to it, in large scale. Cargomatic notwithstanding, right? We really have a lot of these sort of blue collar folks that are out there doing these alternative jobs that pay well. And the mom and pop shops in our community depend on those workers being out there buying their goods and services and going to their restaurants. And so, we need to figure out ways to go through economic transition. And we're also going through energy transition right now. And we have an oil economy in Long Beach and in Signal Hill. Oh my gosh. And Carson, of course, with its refinery as well. We have, a reliance on an oil economy here. If the state is transitioning away from that, transitioning away from fossil fuels as a whole, what's our plan? So those are the things that we're addressing. I'm very blessed to be put on, a lot of important roles in the legislature. The speaker appointed me to his leadership team. So I'm the assistant majority whip as a freshman, very happy about that. I'm on the appropriations committee, transportation committee, business and professions, which regulates all the entities going in and out. I've been put on the rules committee, the powerful rules committee. And also on privacy committee. And as a tech person, that's a place that I personally have a lot of that.
That's a good distinction of what you're doing, because you're on all these key committees, especially everything that you do, it relates to our industry either today or will. When you start talking about technology, our industry is more and more tech driven every single day. Right. And what's so interesting, I sit as vice chair of the workforce board for the city of Long Beach. We talk about training all the time. And that's one of the many issues where the state of California has seen we need to retrain. We need to get access to funding. We need to work with the organized labor. We need to work with the employers. We need to work with everybody to make this work. And to your point, there are definitely factions within the government. Just, no automation is good versus automation has really helped the United States become the premier economy in the world since Henry Ford created the assembly line. But it's how do we address that? How do we have a transparent dialogue with the worker so you don't have labor unrest, but at the same time, businesses feel that they can invest in the technological advancements they need to compete on a global level? And that's what we do.
That's right, Weston. But I'm going to take it even further.
There's something beyond just the economic. There's something emotional. There's something about the human condition. There's something about a satisfaction of going to work, doing a job, and coming home and feeling a sense of accomplishment associated with that drives us emotionally. That's critically important. Even if we had the ability to distribute wealth, 100, 200 years from now, and automated literally everything, I don't think that's going to solve our problems. It's not simply about economic distribution, wealth distribution. There's something deeper and more to that. So we got to talk about it all the time. And, it has to be a win-win situation. If we are automating, there has to be greater job creation as a result of it, than we had before. I think we can do it. I think that we can create a service economy around these things and export it and, send it around. I think we have so far to go with our transportation grid as it relates to, having autonomous vehicles, how they communicate with each other, how they communicate with the rest of the grid, how we create efficiencies around that. And I think that that's a service that we can export to the rest of the United States, to the rest of the world. So we need, and the state, California is a very interesting place. There's people who have a lot of criticism about the state of California, despite the fact that we seem to outpace the rest of the United States in economic growth. We're now the 4th largest economy on the planet. We're doing something right. No doubt there's some things that we could do better. We're doing some things right, but we are bold in deciding and incubating areas and industries that we determine are going to be part of our future. We're not afraid to do that. So, one of the things that I can do in representing the 6th and 9th Assembly District is get as loud of a bullhorn as possible and make sure that all the decision makers, including the governor and the powers that be, are laser focused on the goods transition that's happening in the goods movement and be very intentional and deliberate about the things that we are incubating so this local economy flourishes. Because the implications, as you noted earlier, go well beyond this community. It's part of the state of California. It's part of the federal government. Without goods movement, it goes grinding to a halt. Everything's a gun, right? So we need flow.
And with the 2 ports here, literally the people working in goods movement in Long Beach are working on a global level, right? And the innovations that we have here in Southern California, many of the other seaports around the world, many of the other goods movement cities around the world look at Southern California as not just the bellwether of where things are going, but almost as the guinea pig for everything, right? Like we do the innovation and the testing, and then a decade later, others will adopt things that we've essentially brought to the forefront. And I think that that's one of the unique things about California is, to your point, new regulations come in place, but how do you create industry clusters that then result in more jobs, more career pathways, better jobs, better opportunities? I think that's something that California's done since the aerospace boom, right at the middle of the century. So I want to pivot a little bit on that because California has maybe one of the most sophisticated and bureaucratic governments in the nation, right? Maybe even at times more so than the federal government. And the state legislature, and especially the committees you're on, and the select committee on ports, right? You're coming up with different strategies, funding. How do we execute on some of the agency directives, right? And I'm not going to go into a deep rabbit hole here, but CARB and AQMD are very much charged with cleaner air. That is their sole purpose, cleaner air. You've also got other agencies like the Public Utilities Commission, CAISO, the Energy Commission. They're all trying to figure out infrastructure. How do they support the efforts of people like CARB and AQMD on getting to those goals that they've outlined? And then you've got you and your colleagues who are the ones that are really where the rubber meets the road saying, okay, how are we going to appropriate funds? How are we going to work to expedite certain types of permits because we need it to make sure that things function? Talk a little bit about that role, because I feel like almost everybody I've spoken to that is involved in transportation understands what you're talking about. It's that migration to the next phase. It's not okay, we're just going to turn it off and turn it on. And it's about the enablement, right? It's
Well, Weston, you're good at this. You're asking good questions. There isn't one size fit all, and sometimes you have to employ creative thinking to solve problems. I'm going to give an example, which is not about goods movement; it's about people movement, and that's the Catalina Express. Avalon is in the district. We have a million visitors to Catalina every year, despite the fact that there's only 4,000 to 5,000 residents that live there, depending on the season.
And it's right in the path of hurricanes that come up the Pacific coast.
It was evacuated. It was a recommended voluntary evacuation, but of course, Southern California Edison, that provides all the utilities, even gas and water, out at the island, and their water is desal. That's a whole nother conversation we could have. Basically gave the warning that we may need to shut down our utilities because we can't withstand this. There are people that are on ventilators or, other things out there that would have, of course, been catastrophic. And so there was, and I'm glad we're talking about this, because how do people evacuate on the Catalina Express? Catalina Express, was under a lot of the pressures that you're talking about, through these mandates and changes that we're having to hit certain environmental goals, and CARB and so forth. It was a situation where the boats, the engines that would have needed to be required, these zero emission engines, wouldn't fit in the boats that they have right now. Physically, it wouldn't fit inside those boats. So is it draconian going to the owner of the Catalina Express saying, you have to do this? You're going to have to find a way to do this? Where does the money come? Come from the ratepayers that are going over back and forth to Catalina, most of whom are workers, most of whom are operating the stores. 60% of that population Latino, actually workers that are over there. Could you triple the cost just of a ticket to go across? Infeasible. Totally, completely collapse. So there's times where the state has to employ critical thinking and figuring out ways, okay, we still want to reach those goals, but we're going to need to help the operator make that transition, as a matter of fact. And my predecessor, Patrick O'Donnell, did the heaviest lifting on that to get funding, state funding, so that we would be able to do that. Now, that state funding belongs to all of us. It's all of our money. It's your money, Weston.
But I tell everybody.
Your employees. But ultimately, what are we going to have? We are going to have communities with much better air. We are ultimately going to have an affordable price to be able to go back and forth to Catalina associated with that. You're going to have an owner-operator that is working well with the state in those things. And I think that needs to be a comprehensive approach as we look at things. It's tough, this notion of truck owner operators having to shell out the money that it would cost for an electric truck right now, which are in such high demand that the prices are through the roof. The state's going to have to figure out how it can participate in things like that. And so I don't think that we're afraid to have those types of conversations. And we need, as I said earlier, we need to be finding the win-win.
Absolutely. And I think you're hitting on something, which is clean air is something that benefits all of us. It's a community benefit. And when we're starting to look at anything, whether it's the transportation industry, whether it's the people movement back and forth to Catalina, whether it's the transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy as part of the energy portfolio, there is everybody has a stake in the game. And because of that, the state of California and other public agencies and the federal government get involved. And it's not a handout, it's a hand up, right? It's allowing people the opportunity to transition as their business allows for it, in a way where we don't put all the businesses out of business and all the people out of work. And I think that's the balancing act that you've been dealing with. And I want to transition a little bit because go ahead.
May I comment really quickly? I just want to say something. There are some things, inherent to the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles that many would think is a huge disadvantage. For example, that we have local communities living right up next to the port complex and the transportation corridor. You don't have that in New York and New Jersey at all. They don't deal with so many of the issues that we deal with here. And many would think that that's an albatross. I don't think that. I think that, the issues that we're confronting because having these residential communities right up here and the difficulties, the challenges we have in transportation infrastructure associated with that is making us better. The fact that we are actually addressing things in a pioneering way, means that we're going to be global leaders on these fronts. And actually, so many of these, global corporations that are trying to, reach their own environmental standards, we're going to help them meet those goals simply by doing trade in and out of the ports of Long Beach and LA, because we had to do that from our residents that are right next door. And so, for me, it's incredibly, incredibly exciting overcoming these hurdles and using those as comparative.
And you just helped me with this transition, because this is so great. You've started what is potentially a 12-year career in the state legislature, right? I mean, that's what currently that's what term limits are. And if I know you're somebody that could, if you want bigger and better things in your political future, but you're going to be here for a while, and you're tackling some of these things like really at the inception point. And so talk a little bit about what you've learned. Right. One of the things I've always appreciated about you, whether it was as an elected official now, or whether it was as a business person, or whether it was playing pickup basketball, is you're very inquisitive. You always want to know the why. You want to know everything about everything before you really commit to a decision. And now you've had some time to evaluate these different issues and sit through hearings and talk to stakeholders and hold town halls, do all the things that a good legislator or a good elected official does. Talk a little bit about what you've learned, and then maybe a little bit about some of the priorities that you are going to bring forward heading into next year, because next year I think is going to be a hallmark year for this industry.
Yeah. Let me sort of bring you back behind the curtain here. That's really kind of you to say, and yeah, maybe I did wonder, why is Weston throwing up that half-court shot? And he made it. Okay, that's why.
Ginger Kobe.
You're quite the hooper. On a very selfish level, this role is wonderful because I do love to learn, and literally you have an opportunity. It's like an intellectual buffet. You have an opportunity to look across any particular issue and speak to the experts at the highest level. So here in Goods Movement, I can speak to the president of the ILWU, or the CEO of Maersk, or the Long Beach Container Terminal, or talk to the Teamsters, or you name it, or the Watson Land. And at the highest levels, they want to talk, lay out their vision, their policy advice, and collaborate. And that's a blessing, the ability to collaborate with, stakeholders at the highest level. So I'm really thoroughly enjoying that, again, on a very, very selfish level. I don't have personal political aspiration. I'm really feeling unbelievable blessing representing this community in the state legislature. And if I have the ability to do it for the entire time, if you'll have me, certainly, would relish in that opportunity. I have to say, Weston, Goods Movement is something that's on the hearts and minds, directly or indirectly, of anybody in this community, and I'm not excluded from that, but we all have different things going on. You and I are both parents. A lot of the legislation that I'm involved in is driven from being a dad, and specifically a girl dad. I've got 3 daughters. They're 13, 11, and 9. I have legislation that has to do with body shaming at school, that has to do with a crisis of roofing, people spiking each other's drinks, committing sexual assault that's happening throughout our state, and other issues around, girls growing up in the state of California. And I take the experiences of being a dad, and I'm able to bring those, in as part of my bill package. We have things like the housing crisis, homelessness crisis, environmental impacts and changes that are taking place before our eyes that we have to address, that are all intertwined in the things that you and I are talking about right now. And California is fascinating. It is a bold environment. We're not afraid of confronting our challenges. And one of the things that I'm really enjoying and learning about in this state, very, very different than the federal government, is we don't get stuck in ideology. That's not to say that there aren't ideologues that are really trying to push their point of view. People from the labor movement that are solely focused on working conditions for working class folks, men and women in California. And I love them for that. They're not people that are coming from the business community and the chambers and so forth that are only looking at things from the how to maximize shareholder value. I love them for that. Those are good things too. But what I do find in California, I see this in the governor, the pro tem, the speaker, the members of the legislature, is that we try not to get stuck in ideology. Maybe part of the reason that's taking place is because we do have a supermajority of Democrats. And so what I find is my colleagues in the legislature that are Republicans, we work well together. We want to do things. We're no longer fighting for power of the body. So we really are laser focused on what can we accomplish together? How can we do these things together? You see that in anything from the fentanyl crisis and so forth to issues around privacy, digital privacy, and so forth. So I really am enjoying lawmaking and administering the budget in the state of California because we use creative thinking, we use vision here. We don't get stuck in ideology. We're really focused on the results as it relates to those things. And I feel that that's very, very different than what's happening in Washington right now, which is really about power and control on both sides and the gridlock associated.
People over politics in California is what I'm hearing from you. And again, you talked about your bill package, and what I like is that you look at it as a package, right? And how they all impact one another. When you talk about things like social inequities or cost of living crisis, you're also then having to deal with things like lack of workforce or the inability to grow as a business because you don't have access to the right people in the right places, right? Or if people aren't making the right type of wages and don't have access to the right type of opportunities, then they're worried about living and they can't always focus on their careers and moving forward. And so there is a lot.
And from that, Weston, that's where 25 years in running businesses really comes into play, right? It's like taking those experiences into the legislature. That doesn't mean that I don't have a heart for progressive, causes and so forth. It means I have a pragmatic look at how we can make people's quality of life better. If we are one to aspire to have, for example, universal healthcare for all, we got to pay for it. How are we going to pay for it? I'm really, laser focused on those things. It's not that I'm against them. I'm in favor of them as long as we can pay for these types of things. And there is consensus around that. There's a bill by my colleague Lena Gonzalez about expanding sick days and having guaranteed sick days in the state of California. Now, as an employer, I'm currently an employer. As an employer right now, we know it's tough out there. You have to be offering, a certain amount of amenities to your employees if you want to attract the best talent, right? So there may be a voice out there saying, "Oh, this is bad for our economy. Are people going to take advantage?" The reality is the competition in the workforce right now. If we're not doing that, we're going to be losing our.
Well, and working for a people first company, Cargomatic, we see that, right? It's one of the things we do every single day. Being one of the major innovators, not just in this city, but in this industry as a whole. You can only build a great company if you have great people working at it, and it comes down to how do you attract the best people, the best talent. It really does come down to being a people first company. And I think that's something that we all can do a better job of is making sure that, especially small business, because our industry is made up of so much small business. You think about the average trucking company, over 85% has 10 trucks or less, right? It is a micro business economy in many
I love it.
and
I love it.
how do you
Yeah.
attract people to this industry? You need to have a good employer reputation. How do you get a good employer reputation? It's about having programs and resources that not just people but businesses can tap into to take some of the burden off government. And that's why I always like talking policy with you, because it's not this black and white. You must do it this way. You must do it that way. It is how does it all impact each
it's
other?
even more than that. It's even more than that, Weston. Like, by solving one problem in one area, you inadvertently create another problem somewhere else. Great example of that. I don't think this applies to truckers per se, but COVID changed the way that workers want to work. A lot of people want to stay home and work from home and have a hybrid situation from home, and we've had to adapt to that, and that is what the workforce demands. And it is an employees market right now. As a matter of fact, we've had to make changes. So what is that? What has been one of the results of that? Less people using public transit, less people using public transportation to go to work. The revenue on public transit has gone way down. Now the state all of a sudden has these huge deficits funding public transit agencies. We have to ask ourselves these existential questions. Do we continue going down that road? Much like Catalina Express, you can't quadruple the rates that people are paying to go on a bus or the metro or so forth. So, in some ways, solving for certain problems create others. And, here we are again.
Yeah, I know we're getting close to time, and I've appreciated you taking so much time out to be with us today. One last question for you, and again, just manifesting it. 10 years from now, you're serving your last term as an assembly member. What are the big challenges that you see today that a decade from now you'll look back and say, what are the top 3 things that you'll say, I'm really glad I had the chance to work on these things and leave a legacy in the state of California?
100%. It's going to be on the goods movement sector and solving the issue of, increasing trade, growing our local economy, having a plan for, this once in 100 years transition in automation and environmental, protection while growing business. So I would definitely say that on that side. And on the other side, I'm really, concerned about our digital footprint, our digital privacy, our ability to evolve individually without algorithms telling us how we should be evolving, how that manifests itself to our youth, how social media may be, playing a role in a 65% increase in anxiety and suicide and eating disorders of our youth right now than it was 10 years ago. And so those are sort of the main areas that I intend to focus over the next 10 years. I really appreciate you, teeing up the question that way. And these things are dynamic. They're never going to be solved per se, but hopefully we can make a big dent and create consensus around, which direction we want to go together and collaborate. And, my commitment to all of the stakeholders in the 69th, from the business community, the small businesses, as you just pointed out, the workers, people who live in the community, is everything has to be win-win. It has to be, or else we need to keep working on it.
I couldn't agree with you more. Josh, thanks for joining us today. Proud to not just call you our legislator, but call you our friend, and really appreciate the opportunities we've had since you've taken office, even beforehand, to talk about Cargomatic, our position in the supply chain, what we're trying to do to make the world a better place, one container at a time, one truck at a time. And thank you again for everything. I know that we'll have you on again at some point in time, and it's an open invitation. Anytime there's big things going on with ports, with goods movement, with infrastructure, just let us know. We'd love to have you back and keep our listeners updated, because many of our listeners are the big shippers that use these ports and that need to know that folks like you have an ear, that you're willing to listen, and that you understand the industry. And I just want to, from everybody at Cargomatic, thank you for everything you're doing, and thank you again for the open door policy for the industry to come tell you our perspective on things, so we can get the right type of resolutions.
Weston, what you are doing at Cargomatic is nothing short of spectacular, and I vehemently agree that 10 years from now, everybody will be, on the same page as what you're doing today in terms of your philosophy and your tech-driven approach. It is the way everything is going, so I commend you on that. And I also commend you on this podcast, your ability to really build community around these things. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And for anybody that's listening, if there are any ways that we can learn about the difficulties, challenges that your company or that your neighborhood or workforce group, if there are ways that we can learn about it so that we can improve your quality of life and your businesses, please reach out. We would love to sit with you and learn more about those things and find out how we can help.
Thank you so much. That's California State Assemblymember Josh Lowenthal, representing the cities of Long Beach, Carson, Signal Hill, and of course, beautiful Avalon and the Catalina wine mixer, to steal a line from one of my favorite movies. But thank you again for joining us for this episode of People on the Move, a Cargomatic podcast. I'm Weston LaBar, and we'll see you next time.